Yeah, how's it going? So, the other night, I was sitting in my chair and I was watching this complete utter lunatic of a madman spend 7,000 hours just to max his Ultimate Iron Man account. And what surprised me the most was the part where he went, "Ha, that wasn't hard enough. Let's lock myself to this tiny portion of the map and do it all over again." Now, the truly sad realization is that I'm there, 5,000 hours deep into trying to max a regular Iron Man, going, "Oh yeah, this is my kind of autism." So, here we go. I'm going to try and do my own equivalent stupid challenge for no other reason than because I can. Then, the few months of theory crafting began. And see, I wanted to be the first person to do this challenge, not because I wanted the ego, although I do have a pretty big ego. More because I wanted to do my own form of challenge, where the theory crafting hasn't been done before, and I'll be exposed to my own unique challenges which people haven't overcome yet. So I considered doing a Tyronin locked account, a Moritania locked account like Settled did, and also I considered doing a chunk locked account, but considering they've all been done before, I decided to settle on a Xanaris only account. Well, not exactly a Xanaris only account, more of a fairy ring only account, where my only form of transportation is fairy rings, and I'm only allowed to stay in fairy ring chunks. So here's the story of the beginning of this silly account that I've decided to make. Now, like almost all dumb RuneScape adventures, we find ourselves in Lumbridge, and the first thing that I had to do was figure out what my plan was. The canonical quests I needed to complete are Druidic Ritual, Priest in Peril, Nature Spirit, Rune Mysteries, and Fairy Tale Part 1, with a little bit of Druidic Ritual on the side. So the first goal on the account was actually to complete the quest Priest in Peril, but I figured that I could use a Ring of Recall on the Temple Guardian, and that would save me a little bit of experience, meaning I get to start the account with a lower total level. Now, the first quest I decided to complete was Goblin Diplomacy. Now, this gave me no benefits after starting the challenge, however, it did give me access to a gold bar. With that gold bar, I could combine it with a sapphire that I just bought from a shop to make a Ring of Recoil. However, this did require 7 magic. So instead of just training my magic level to 7, I decided to first do the quest Lost City. So Lost City comes with a 36 woodcutting requirement and a 31 crafting requirement. Also, I have to kill the tree spirit, so I figured if I use magic on that, that's what I'll do to get the level 7 magic. So my journey began in Lumbridge, and my first goal was to get 31 crafting and 36 woodcutting. So to begin woodcutting, I decided to make my way towards Edville, which was surprisingly eventful. So I sold all the logs that I cut at the Edgeville General Store just to get me some starter cash. Now, my plan for crafting was actually a little bit more complicated, so I wanted to do almost all of my training, or as much as possible, in fairy-only chunks. So I decided to pick up seaweed and turn it into soda ash on the shores near Relica, and then use the sand pit down in Yanil to make molten glass, and this allowed me to get some pretty, obviously free crafting experience, and I did this all the way to 31 crafting, which actually took about 8 hours. So now we had 31 crafting, all we needed to do was complete the Lost City quest. So I went and spoke to the warrior, cut down the tree, I then went over to Entrana, I used airstrike to kill the zombie, luckily I got the bronze axe on my first kill, and then I went straight over to the tree spirit. Say spotted it, the tree spirit fell, and I'd completed Lost City, giving me access to my Draymond staff. So the other benefit of knocking out Lost City was that now I had everything I needed to make the Ring of Recoil. So all I needed to get now was some Cosmic Runes. So I ran up to level 50 something wild, picked up the 3 Cosmic Rune spawn that spawned next to the Ice Giants, went back, made my Ring of Recoil, and now it was time to take on Priest in Peril. So I bought a shortbow from Lowe's archery store in Varrock and also some iron arrows, and I used this to attack the Temple Guardian. In addition, I had the Ring of Recoil doing some extra damage, which allowed me to take it down pretty easy. And after that, I had to kill the mage in the Temple of Patadermis. So this is a little bit more tricky, but conveniently I could actually use my main Iron Man to help me out here. So I could use the same method that Settle did to take down the Zami mage. I used the Serp Helm and a Toxic Blowpipe on my main Iron Man to get a 100% chance of venoming. After the mage healed back to full health when it was venomed, I could damage it single health with the Fairy Locked account, which gave me the key I needed to continue the quest. So that marks the completion of Priest in Peril. Now it was under Nature Spirit, which went pretty smoothly. I just took out the 3 ghasts using magic, and then finished the quest. So this meant it was time for the big boy quest, Fairy Tail Part 1. Now, I didn't exactly know how I was going to kill the Tanglefoot, I was just planning on flinching it. But this is the quest that could really screw me. And that's because you need to get 3 completely random items. So unfortunately, I actually lost the recording of me finding out what I needed to get. However, what I did need to get was a charcoal, pretty easy, a king red vine worm thingy-ma-fuck, and also a closed oyster. Now, on face value, they seem pretty easy, and indeed the charcoal's piss easy, so is the red vine worm. However, the oyster was a little bit of a problem. And this was because only a few things drop oysters, and they actually have a pretty low chance of dropping it. So I knew that I was going to get a lot of experience actually trying to get it. But I came up with a better idea, and that was actually to do some panning. Now, I tested this on my main, and it seemed that I get oysters pretty damn often, but unfortunately it seems to scale with your level. So I did panning, I tried about 40 times, and it wasn't until just after I got to fishing that I got the oyster. But what this did mean is it saved me a lot of experience killing rock crabs or other monsters that may have to drop it. And as far as it goes, I think we got away pretty easy with those 3 items. If we got something like a nature talisman, I would have been royally fucked. So I took the 3 items to the Nature Spirit, got my magic Secators, and it was time to take on the Tangleroot. So my first attempt at the Tangleroot was a absolute miserable pathetic fail, and that's because it was impossible for me to do any damage whatsoever. So I clearly had to rethink my plan for this boss, so I ended up just going and doing a little bit of training to raise my strength to level 15. I then took it on again, and this time we were successful. Although it did take me about an hour straight of flinching, as you can see by my login time at the bottom left corner of my screen. Fuck my life. But regardless of the adversity that we faced, we finally did it. We'd completed the Fairy Tail Part 1, which means we could start Fairy Tail Part 2 and get access to those sweet, sweet fairy rings that we so coveted. And so now before we start actually on this journey, there are a few other things that we needed to do. So the first being Druidic Ritual, simply because locking Herblore just left way too much content unachievable. In addition to that, we also unlocked the Catacombs of Kourend. There's one fairy chunk that has an access in there, so what we did is run in there as quick as I could, climbed up the vine and did my absolute best not to die. An interesting thing happened whilst I was doing this. You probably noticed I dropped to 0 health. And then appeared back at 1 health at the top, so problem solved. Lastly, I gave myself a saw, and that's because, to my knowledge, there's no other way to get a saw in a fairy chunk, and that would completely lock construction. Just to finalise everything, and to put this in stone, here are the rules and the exceptions that we'll be doing for the fairy-only Iron Man. So the first and possibly the most obvious rule is that we must remain in a fairy ring chunk at all times. In addition, we must use fairy rings for transport, but we can walk and teleport between adjacent fairy ring chunks. However, you're not allowed to walk, say, in a non-fairy ring chunk to get to a other fairy ring chunk. Lastly, all underground regions are allowed as long as their entrance is in a fairy ring chunk. And this is possibly one of my favourite rules, and you'll see why. This actually opens up quite a few really interesting areas which will make this challenge just a little bit more interesting. Also, considering there are a few fairy chunks that are locked behind quest requirements, I've set at different total levels the ability to complete specific quests that aren't present in a fairy chunk, simply to unlock a new fairy chunk. So at 500 total, we'll be allowing myself to complete Death to Dorgashun, at 750 total, In Search of the Miracle, at 1000 total, the Fremnik Trials, and at 1500 total, Monkey Madness. So I made 3 exceptions for this account, the first being Druidic Ritual, which allowed me to unlock Herblore. Second, Rune Mysteries, which technically unlocks rune grafting, but the main reason I did it was to get the Rune Essence for Priest in Peril. And lastly, a Saw, because to my current knowledge it's not possible to get a Saw within a fairy-only chunk, and it unlocks Construction, which will allow me to use my player-owned house. So it's important to note that it is possible that more exceptions will be made in the future if something that's impossible to do is blocking a large amount of content. However, due to the nature of the account, I don't think we'll have to make any. And lastly, Death. Spawning from a death, as you probably know, will leave me in Lumbridge. So if that occurs, I must immediately get a Drayman Staff from the bank and return to Xanaris, which is a fairy chunk just south of Lumbridge. I can collect my items, assuming they're not in a non-fairy chunk, so they have to be in a fairy ring chunk for me to be able to collect them, although I can tele-grab them from a non-fairy ring chunk. And also, I must buy the Edgeville spawn point, which costs 5 million gold, as soon as possible. Whilst editing, I decided to change the rule of what happens when I leave a fairy ring chunk. I've decided that when I leave a fairy ring chunk, I'll have to drop 1 stack of items from my bank, which will be randomly selected. And lastly, here are the goals for at least Season 1. Our goal is to get the coveted Fire Cape, so you may not even know that there's actually a fairy ring in the Tazar area. Now, I'm not great at PVM, so you're almost going to definitely get to watch me getting absolutely fucking diddlied by Jad, but hopefully at some point we can complete it. In the future, there are so many goals we can do. If we can complete the Fire Cape, it may mean we have to go for the Inferno, we'll see. But we'll see what type of gear we end up with. Now, I'm really excited for this challenge, so I hope you enjoyed this video. Episode 1 will be out soon, and I hope you're looking forward to it. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.